In May of 1962, Adolf Eichmann was executed by hanging. The man who had served as the architect and chief logistics coordinator of the Holocaust died before the watching eyes of the world. His cremated remains were scattered across the open sea, deliberately ensuring that no burial site could ever become a shrine for future followers. By all reasonable expectations, the story should have concluded at that point. A monster had been brought to justice. A family had been left living in permanent disgrace. However, Eichmann's 4 sons were watching everything unfold. Within just months of their father's execution, 3 of these sons had begun constructing explosive devices and actively planning attacks targeting Jewish children. This is the complete story of what happened to Adolf Eichmann's family members and why his toxic legacy absolutely refused to die along with him when he was hanged in that Israeli prison. Before we trace the disturbing journey of how the Eichmann sons transformed from fugitives living in hiding to active terrorists, please stay focused if you want to truly understand how Nazi ideology managed to survive and persist long after the men who originally built that system had died or been captured. The decade they lived openly while hiding in plain sight. To fully comprehend how the Eichmann sons eventually became radicalized, you must first see and understand the environment in which they were raised. After successfully escaping from Europe through the Vatican-operated rat lines in 1950, Adolf Eichmann did not choose to hide himself away in some remote, isolated village or assume a completely new identity while living in total obscurity. Instead, he obtained regular employment at the Mercedes-Benz automotive company. He socialized openly and without apparent fear with Buenos Aires' thriving and well-established German immigrant community. He attended social meetings and gatherings, shook hands with neighbors and acquaintances, and lived his daily life as if the war crimes tribunals that were being conducted across Europe had absolutely nothing to do with him or his past actions. By the middle of 1952, Eichmann felt sufficiently secure in his new life that he sent for his wife Vera and their 4 sons to join him. The family successfully reunited in Argentina and settled into what appeared to be a comfortable middle-class existence in their new South American home. But here is what makes this situation truly remarkable and almost unbelievable. Despite Adolf Eichmann being perhaps the single most actively wanted Nazi war criminal still alive and at large, his children attended local schools under their actual real family name. They did not use the false name Clement, which was the alias their father had adopted for himself. They used the surname Eichmann. They walked into classrooms, introduced themselves to teachers and administrators, and made friends with other students while openly carrying the family name of a man that Israeli intelligence agencies were desperately and actively hunting across the globe. For an entire decade, this dangerous arrangement somehow worked successfully. The Eichmann family lived in plain sight of everyone around them, protected by an extensive web of Nazi sympathizers who had also fled to South America after the war, and by an Argentine government that apparently saw no compelling reason to look too closely or ask too many questions about its rapidly growing German immigrant population. This comfortable and secure existence shaped the development of the Eichmann sons in ways that would only become fully clear and visible after the father's eventual capture. These boys were not raised to feel any guilt or shame about the Holocaust and their father's central role in it. They were instead raised to feel pride in their family's contribution to Nazi Germany's genocidal mission. The girlfriend whose father changed everything. But this carefully protected life contained a fatal weakness, and that weakness took human form in the person of Klaus, the eldest Eichmann son. Klaus had inherited his father's arrogance and sense of superiority without acquiring any of his father's learned caution about revealing too much. During the late 1950s, Klaus began dating a teenage girl named Sylvia Hermann. She was attractive, she spoke German fluently, and Klaus was extremely eager to impress her with his family background. What Klaus did not know, and what would prove absolutely catastrophic for his father, was that Sylvia's father, Lothar Hermann, was a Holocaust survivor who had escaped from Germany. Lothar had fled the country before the full outbreak of war, but not before Nazi thugs had beaten him so brutally that he had been permanently blinded from his injuries. Now, Lothar Hermann lived quietly in Buenos Aires, raising his daughter within the same German immigrant community that sheltered and protected the Eichmann family. One evening, Klaus came to dinner at the Hermann family home. He desperately wanted to make a strong positive impression on Sylvia's family members. So he began talking about his own father, boasting about how the man, known publicly as Ricardo Klement, was not really Ricardo Klement at all, but was actually a high-ranking official who had held an important position in the Nazi government during the war years. Klaus bragged openly about what his father had accomplished, about his important and powerful position during the war. Lothar Hermann sat at that dinner table, blind and unable to see the young man who was boasting about genocide, that he listened carefully to every single word. He immediately recognized the enormous significance of what he was hearing. After Klaus left the Hermann home that night, Lothar began making careful inquiries and asking discreet questions. He contacted Israeli intelligence services and shared everything he had learned from Klaus's careless bragging. The son's arrogance displayed at a dinner table would ultimately cost his father everything he had built in Argentina. The bouquet of flowers that sealed his fate. The Israeli intelligence agency Mossad took Lothar Hermann's tip very seriously, but moved forward with extreme caution. For many months, their agents carefully watched and observed the man who called himself Ricardo Klement. They documented his daily routines, his personal habits, and his family life. However, they needed absolute confirmation of his true identity before they could take any action. Grabbing and kidnapping the wrong man would create a complete disaster, diplomatically, politically, and morally. The final confirmation came on March 21st, 1960. That particular evening, surveillance agents observed Klement arriving home carrying something unusual and unexpected, a bouquet of fresh flowers. He handed these flowers to his wife at the front door of their home. The gesture seemed small and almost mundane on the surface, but the specific date held enormous significance. This was the couple's 25th wedding anniversary. Adolf Eichmann and Vera Liebel had been married on March 21st, 1935. Ricardo Klement had just revealed his true identity through a single moment of genuine tenderness toward his wife. 7 weeks later, on May 11, 1960, Mossad agents grabbed Eichmann on a darkened street as he was walking home from a bus stop. They bundled him forcefully into a waiting car and transported him to a safe house, where he remained hidden for 10 days before being smuggled onto an airplane bound for Israel, disguised as an El Al airline crew member who was recovering from an accident. But the confirmation of his identity did not end with his capture. When Vera Eichmann filed an official complaint with Argentine courts about her husband's kidnapping, she made an extraordinary and self-incriminating admission in her written legal documents. The formal complaint she submitted stated plainly and explicitly that Ricardo Klement was in fact Adolf Eichmann. In her desperate attempt to get her husband returned to Argentina, she had officially confirmed his true identity to the entire world. Judgment delivered in Jerusalem. For the first time in recorded history, a Holocaust perpetrator would face judgment not from the Allied victors who had won the war, but from representatives of the very people he had systematically tried to exterminate. The Jerusalem trial opened in April of 1961 and became something unprecedented in human history, the first major Holocaust testimony trial that was broadcast globally to audiences around the world. Survivors who had never previously spoken publicly about their experiences took the witness stand and told their stories directly to millions of viewers watching in countries across the globe. The trial lasted 4 full months. The evidence presented against Eichmann was absolutely overwhelming. He had managed the detailed logistics of genocide with cold, bureaucratic precision, coordinating train schedules and camp capacities as if he were operating a shipping company rather than organizing systematic mass murder. His legal defense, that he was merely following orders, merely functioning as a cog in a larger machine, convinced absolutely no one who heard it. On December 15, 1961, the court formally convicted Adolf Eichmann on 15 separate counts, including crimes against the Jewish people and crimes against humanity. his family members submitted a joint clemency appeal to the Israeli government. They formally asked Israel to spare his life and commute his death sentence. The appeal was reviewed and rejected. However, Israel did grant one extraordinary concession to the family. They allowed Vera Eichmann a secret final prison visit with her condemned husband. Foreign Minister Golda Meir personally imposed the strict conditions: 24 hours maximum for the visit, and immediate departure from Israel afterward. Vera traveled to Ramla prison and spent time alone with her husband in his prison cell. What words passed between them during those final private hours remains completely unknown. Vera never spoke of it publicly to anyone, and no official record of their conversation was ever created or preserved. The execution that was supposed to end everything. On May 31, 1962, at exactly 1 minute past midnight, Adolf Eichmann was hanged at Ramla prison. He holds the distinction of being the only person ever executed by the State of Israel. His body was cremated within hours of his death, and his ashes were scattered in the Mediterranean Sea beyond Israeli territorial waters. The Israeli authorities had thought through every possible detail. There would be no grave that could become a shrine for followers. There would be no physical remains that supporters could venerate or worship. There would be no specific place where neo-Nazis could gather to pay tribute. The Israelis had deliberately closed every door to potential martyrdom and had eliminated every possibility of creating a physical legacy. But they had not counted on the sons. What happened next completely defies everything you would logically expect from a family marked forever by the most publicized Nazi trial in human history. You might reasonably assume they retreated in shame, changed their names, and tried to disappear into anonymity. You would be completely wrong. The terror cell operating in Buenos Aires. Within just months of their father's execution, 3 of the 4 Eichmann sons doubled down on their commitment to their father's ideology in ways that shocked even Argentine authorities, who were generally sympathetic to former Nazis. Klaus and Horst Eichmann formed a neo-Nazi terror cell right in Buenos Aires, actively recruiting like-minded young men and systematically stockpiling weapons for future operations. Police surveillance of the Eichmann family home revealed swastika flags flying openly from their windows. Horst wore a Nazi armband indoors, as if the war had never actually ended. The brothers manufactured Molotov cocktails, collected firearms and ammunition, and distributed propaganda materials throughout the German community. They were not simply honoring their father's memory, they were actively continuing his work and mission. Their intended targets included Jewish institutions across Buenos Aires. Police reports from 1962 described detailed plans to bomb a school bus carrying Jewish children. The sons of the man who had organized the transport of millions to death camps were now planning to murder children on their way to school. When Argentine police finally raided their headquarters, they discovered an arsenal of weapons and stacks of Nazi propaganda materials. The evidence was absolutely undeniable. Horst was convicted and served approximately 2 years in prison, a remarkably light sentence given the severity of the terrorist plot. Klaus was released for what the court called a lack of substantial evidence. Despite the weapons found in his home, neither brother ever renounced their father or his ideology. Neither expressed any regret for the terror cell they had built. They simply continued living in Argentina, growing older but no wiser, their beliefs completely unchanged by experience or reflection. The son, who chose a completely different path, but one Eichmann son chose a radically different path entirely. Ricardo Eichmann was only 5 years old when Mossad agents grabbed his father on that Buenos Aires street. He had no real memories of Adolf Eichmann as a free man. He only remembered the trial, the execution, and the terrible aftermath. After the execution, Vera took young Ricardo back to Germany. She raised him there, but she absolutely refused to discuss her husband's crimes. The subject was simply off limits in their household. Ricardo grew up knowing exactly who his father was, but receiving no guidance whatsoever on how to process that knowledge or come to terms with that legacy. He chose education as his path forward. Ricardo studied prehistory and archaeology at the University of Heidelberg, earned his doctoral degree, and built a professional career entirely separate from his family's dark history. Eventually, he became director of the Orient Department at the German Archaeological Institute in Berlin, a prestigious position in one of Europe's leading research institutions. In 1995, Ricardo gave an interview to Israeli newspapers that absolutely stunned his family members. He stated publicly that he was happy the trial and sentence had taken place, and that as an adult, he had no connection with his father whatsoever. Of 4 sons, he was the only one to publicly condemn Adolf Eichmann. The Eichmann family split into 2 groups: 3 brothers who became more openly Nazi than their father had ever been publicly, and 1 brother who walked away entirely from that legacy. That split mirrors how Germany itself divided over the question of confronting its past. Some Germans doubled down on denial and minimization, while others chose to face the truth directly. Ricardo proved that breaking free was possible, even from the darkest of inheritances. 4 brothers, 4 completely different fates. So where are these brothers now? Klaus died in Germany in 2015 from Alzheimer's disease. In all his years of life, he never spoke a single word against his father. He carried his Nazi beliefs to the grave, completely unrepentant and unchanged. Horst died the same year in Buenos Aires from cancer. His mistress, Carmen Breton Lindemann, described him in interviews as a strong Nazi who believed his father was innocent until the very end. Even in his final years, swastika flags hung in his home. He died exactly as he had lived, committed to an ideology that had murdered millions. Dieter, the quiet middle brother, chose a different strategy than either extremism or public condemnation. He chose complete silence. As of 2018, he was reportedly still alive, living in a Buenos Aires apartment just blocks from where Mossad agents seized his father nearly 60 years earlier. He has never spoken publicly, never granted an interview, never confirmed or denied his beliefs about his father's crimes. His silence speaks volumes, but exactly what it says remains open to interpretation. Ricardo retired from the German Archaeological Institute in 2020. He lives in Germany, far from his brothers, having built a life and career that had nothing to do with his father's legacy. He proved that the Eichmann name did not have to be a curse if you were willing to reject everything it stood for. The family that Israel tried to deny a shrine by scattering Eichmann's ashes instead became 4 living monuments: 3 to the ideology that would not die, and 1 to the possibility of breaking free. The legacy that refused to scatter. Vera Eichmann died in 1997 at the age of 88. She spent her final decades reading the Bible and refusing to discuss her husband. In all those years, she never made a single public statement about his crimes. She never acknowledged the suffering he caused. She never expressed remorse for the role she played in raising sons who would continue his ideology. What the Eichmann family reveals is deeply uncomfortable. Proximity to genocide does not automatically produce moral reckoning. The sons who lived longest with their father, who absorbed his worldview during their formative years, became the most radical. They did not reject what he stood for, they amplified it. The son who barely knew him, who was too young to remember him as anything but a defendant sitting in a glass booth, was the only one who could condemn him. Adolf Eichmann's ashes are somewhere in the Mediterranean, scattered so thoroughly that no trace remains. The Israelis succeeded in denying him a physical grave, but his family proves something that should trouble all of us. Ideas are harder to scatter than remains. Beliefs do not dissolve in seawater. Hatred passes from generation to generation through dinner table conversations, through bragging to girlfriends, through swastika flags hung in living rooms. The Eichmann sons were given every opportunity to choose differently. They could have rejected their father's legacy, as Ricardo eventually did. Instead, 3 of them chose to carry it forward, to build bombs and plan attacks and keep the faith. The man who organized the trains to Auschwitz raised sons who wanted to bomb school buses. That is the uncomfortable truth about Nazi legacies. Execution does not end them. Scattered ashes do not prevent them. The only thing that stops ideology from spreading is the individual choice to reject it. And that choice is far rarer than we would like to believe. Thank you for watching History Hangover. If you found this video insightful, Check out our other deep dives into the families of Nazi leaders and the figures who shaped World War II. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next upload.